Elizabeth Brodie came over in 1835 on a ship called the Alert, and she actually lived with her uncle's family, and they originally were somewhere on Lot Street, which is Queen Street, and then they moved up into the Whitchurch Stovewell area, where they had a house called Craigieburn. But they left her Elizabeth's best friend behind because she had married into the Hubbard family that's from the Claremont area.
Right.
And so Elizabeth somehow or other meets this gentleman called Thomson. And Tam had come a little bit earlier, but unlike Elizabeth, who came, with a wealthier family, he came on one of the cholera ships, they almost called them, very much in the kind of, in the ship's hollow where people died. And he actually did have to go through the cholera sheds in the Quebec, Montreal area. Tam was somewhat uneducated and lower class, but very handsome and quite a storyteller. Everyone says, Actually, there's this one quotation where when Elizabeth and Tam are finally married, she calls him a big romancer, meaning he just exaggerates. Everything just gets a little bit of a twist on it. So my theory is that Tam and Elizabeth met through the Hubbards, and that Tam bought the property in the Claremont area because the Elizabeth's friend was there. And in one of my books, I say that he kind of sealed the deal to marry Elizabeth because he had the land that he knew would be attractive for Elizabeth to move to where her friend was. But it was all uncleared land at that point. We're really in the pioneer days. And so Tam and, to begin with, Elizabeth, after they married, they had to clear the land and built a log cabin really near to the road because, of course, the rest of the land was uncleared. And then Elizabeth had a baby, and that was John Thompson, who was Tom Thomson's dad. And that's the only child they had, because apparently she had a very, very difficult labor and never had any other children as a consequence. So they cleared the land here in Claremont, and when there was enough money, they built a little cottage up on the hill. John marries Margaret Matheson. So by the time John and Margaret have had all these children, so these are the grandchildren for Elizabeth and Tam, the first house, the cottage, is too small because Margaret Matheson and Thompson has those 7 children that are born here in Claremont very quickly. And so John Sabian of the Pickering Historical Society, who's done all of this research, knows that the second stone house, the one that's a story and a half, is built by 1875. So my guess is that both Tom Thompson and his sister Minnie are probably born in the second, the story and a half house. Some of the stories come through the Harkness connection. And the way that goes is George is the oldest brother. George, because he was an artist himself, thought he was pretty good as an artist and had been longer established than his brother. And so even though his brother gave him artwork, he would pitch it into a basket or a box, I'm not sure, out in the garage. And so when eventually, of course, George lives to 1965, and by that point, Tom Thompson's fame is already pretty much established. So people kept telling him, George, you got to take that artwork out of the garage. And so eventually he moved it, but to show you just how much he thought of his brother's art, he put it up in the attic. So I don't think George was ever blown away by Tom Thompson. Maybe the world is, but his oldest brother wasn't quite as blown away by
the toughest critics, for sure.
Yeah, so Elizabeth is the oldest sister.
Okay.
And Elizabeth then also, of course, is born in Claremont. And because they're the two oldest of the Thomson siblings, they're probably born in the cottage, as it's called. It's the single-story structure in Claremont. All of the children came into an inheritance when they turned 21.
Okay.
And so Elizabeth took the money and went to the Chatham Business School. And there she meets a Comber connection. Comber's near Sarnia, Ontario. She then comes back and she marries T.J. Harkness. And T.J. is actually the executor of Tom Thomson's will. Jessie Fisk is the niece. And Tom Thompson was very fond of his nephews and nieces, but particularly the older ones, which come through Elizabeth Harkness.
Right.
So whenever there's talk about how fond Tom is of children, he's usually the references to the Harkness children, and it's only them that he ever sketches and paints.
Okay.
So there's a picture of a very young Harkness boy, which is a pencil sketch from about 1905, and then there is the colored version of Jessie Fisk as a picture.
Okay.
So the Helen stories, I think I have told some. And then also Kay's story. Kay is the genealogist.
Right.
But that's the connection. It's through the executor of the will, it's the older sister, and then the art connection as well. Because Jessie Fisk goes down to Toronto and studies there and meets with her Uncle Tom in Toronto. I met Jeannie Thompson, Pettipiece, just this year. They had a memorial. They call it the Tom Thompson Wake, but it was really a memorial for the 100th anniversary of his death. It was held in the graveyard. You can see in this picture there's some gravestones behind. And they had invited Jeannie and her sister to speak on behalf of the family. And so I had never met Jeannie, and so I tried to sort out her connection. It's not the easiest in the world, but George, the oldest brother, when he was in Seattle, he was married to another Euphemia. It was Euphemia McLaren. And this Euphemia died early, but not before producing one son. And this son was George the Second, he's called. This George visited up with his relatives in Leith. And when George the Second got to be an adult, he married, and he lived a lot of his life in Brantford, Ontario, and some of it out west, and but the vast chunk of it in Brantford. And when he married, he had 4 sons. And so this is where it gets confusing, because I lost track of which of the 4 sons that she's the descendant of.
Yeah.
But Jeannie is the descendant of one of the sons of this George II. So Jeannie then spoke in the very church where Tom Thompson had been in the choir, where Tom Thompson had attended with the family. It's a charming church, and it's often shown in the documentaries. It's in the West Wind, for example. So Jeannie spoke there, and it's so resonant, like to have a great-granddaughter of Tom Thompson speak in the very church where he worshipped. And she, of course, like a lot of them, have memories of George Thompson, especially since she's related through George Thompson. So we go back to George, who didn't think so highly of his brother's artwork, and apparently I'm not sure where Jeannie got the art, whether she got Tom's out of the garage or from the attic, but she was given, when she was a young child going to kindergarten for show and tell, she was given a Tom Thompson that had come out of either the attic or out of the garage where her grandfather, George Thompson, had kept them. Or maybe it's great-grandfather. You have to forgive my memory getting screwed up here, but she is descended through George. So here she is going to kindergarten with an original Tom Thompson for show and tell as to, a little bit about her family history. And they have another sister whose name is Tracy, and Tracy wasn't able to attend, but Tracy is an artist. So you can see how the the talents make their way through the family. And you go right back, you go to that Claremont homestead, and the second house, which is a story and a half, probably was the site of what the Scots call Cayleys, because John Thompson was very keen on music and made sure that all of his children played music and sang, and they had great times. And there are actually descriptions in some of the books that you have around here in the Pickering local history, because I did research here. I don't know the title of the book off by heart, but there is actually a story where people come in order to have, kitchen parties at the Cayleys, where the dancing and the singing and the music playing is taking part here in the Claremont house.
I was born December 13, 48. My dad farmed on the 8th concession for a long time. My grandfather bought the farm in 1900, and then my dad bought it after that, and then we were expropriated in 72 for the airport. We were doing dairy at the time. We owned about 40 cows at the time. We farmed about 400 acres too, and some cash crops and stuff like that, but mainly feed the cows and stuff like that. So I stayed there, bought a house right in Claremont, and we bought this older house for probably 7 or 8 years, and then we decided to buy a lot over across the Old Brock Road. It was a farm, and they did a subdivision. We bought a lot there and built our own house, and we've been there ever since. So we've been there probably about 30 years. It's quiet. Everybody seems to be friendly. And you pretty well do whatever you kind of want. You don't get, I know the kids have their four-wheelers going up and down the road. Nobody seems to worry about that. It's just kind of a nice old town, really. Well, go back on the farm. My grandfather was a plowman. He plowed with horses for a number of years. He's won a lot of trophies and stuff like that. And then my dad started plowing too, and he won the Ontario Championship numerous times. He's won the Canadian Championship twice. He's went overseas twice. He went to Sweden in '53, where he finished fourth, and then in '57 he went to Germany and was third over there. In the world, yeah. My great-great-grandfather, James, he was president of Markham Fair.
Right.
And my great-grandfather, George, was president. I don't know the dates is offhand.
Yeah.
My grandfather was president of Markham Fair. And my dad was president of Markham Fair in 68, I think it was.
Wonderful.
I was born in November 1930 at the 8th concession of Claremont at Mount Zion. That was my home till I was married, and I came to Claremont 64 years ago as a bride. And I went to continuation school here in Claremont too.
Oh, very interesting.
That was 4 years of high school.
Yeah.
And then I went on to Whitby for a 5th year. 5th form was hard work. A change of schools is always hard.
Right.
But it was fairly enjoyable at Claremont. I belonged to the UCW for 50 years, I guess.
And what does UCW stand for?
United Church Women. And I was member of the Institute, and we celebrated our 100th year a few years ago and had to close because of lack of leadership and membership by that time, but it had been a thriving organization. It was actually rural area for farmers' wives and community, and fellowship and friendship. Yeah.
I was born in 1924 on Steeles Avenue on the Markham side, Steeles and McCowan. But I have a street with my name, Dorothy Britton, just north of Steeles and McCowan.
Incredible.
I moved to Claremont 61 years ago.
Okay.
And we bought a farm and we milked cows. And I would go to the barn morning and night and carry the milk in pails to a cooler, a tank cooler. And then the truck would pick it up. And in the winter, we had to put it in cans and take it down to the road because the milk truck wasn't able to get
up the laneway
in the winter. You don't know your neighbors anymore. I have never met some of them when people used to come on Side Road 20. I would go and visit them, maybe take squash or peas or what, and visit them.
I was born in 1933 on a farm at Balsam, Ontario. Well, I came here to high school, and then I came to live here permanently as a bride in 1955, so I've been here ever since. At that time, there were a lot of young families, and it was a nice place to raise your children, and the school was close by, and they could walk to school. And I don't know, it was home, became home.
Right.
And we had a really good grocery store at the Four Corners. They had meat markets, and all you had to do was phone your order down to the store, and it was delivered to your door. And there was a milkman that came and left milk every day. There was a baker that came twice a week. And there was an ice cream man, came once a week, and a man selling fish. So it was also handy. I didn't need a car. And so when I first came to town, there was a gray coach bus that went into Toronto every day. And then we went through a period where there was a dayliner, as we call it, that went along the train tracks and went into Toronto every day, and then we'd come back at night and bring workers and so on.
Yeah.
And then we went for a long time with no transportation at all, and then last week Durham Transit started coming through town. We've got bus stops.
Everything full circle, right?
Yeah.
I was born in south of Claremont on a farm. Well, I went to school here in Claremont all my life.
Okay.
I started grade 1 and finished here in grade 11. I got married and moved to just up the road, up the Rock Road.
Up Rock Road, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And lived in there
Yeah,
the
we
whole
had
time.
racehorses.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We had 3 brood mares, and the rest were just yearlings and older ones to raise racehorses. Well, it was enjoyable at the races.
Right, yeah.
But there's a lot of work keeping your harness and that cleaned, and And my husband worked in the region of Durham. He was the superintendent.
Okay.
And our brother-in-law lived with us, and he was superintendent down at Ajax.
Okay.
So it was a lot of work.